Chikudi. We give you the front pages of the papers this morning, starting off with Vanguard. Vanguard is leading with NLC, TUC, CSOs rise against hike in electricity tariff. The rider says the tariff hike insensitive Carlos, that's coming from NLC, increase height of insensitivity to suffering masses, that's coming from TUC. Action unfair, unjustifiable, that's coming from CSO. Report, Nigeria needs a $34.5 billion investment to provide electricity access by 2030. And you can read more on page 27. Stories above, FIRS to end multiple taxation, collect market traders VAT. Presidential poll, INEC wiped off results in BVAS, forensic expert tells court. Dollar video, Kano Anti-Graft Agency boss vowed to reopen Ganduje's case. You can see that story on page 9. Nigerians have lost confidence in judiciary, and that's coming from lawyers. You can read on page 25. And on page 4, bandits kill 3 abductor farmers, travelers in Bingwari. Eid el-Kabir, Kano declares a 1-week break for schools. On page 9, Presidency denies approving salary increase for political office holders, judiciary. On page 3, made in Nigerian noodles safe for consumption. That report's coming from NAFDAC. NGE President Governor Mutwang, Nigeria Press Council congratulates Ezianaba. All right, let's take a look at the Nation newspaper. The Nation is leading with we've removed obstacles to growth. Tinubu tells investors. The writer says President promises more investment-friendly reforms. Nigeria seeks UK's support in war against insecurity. And there's a quote, I'm going to take it. It says, we have taken the largest elephant out of the room. We remove our fuel subsidy. Multiple exchange rates are equally gone. Stories below. NLC cautions against electricity tariffs hike. LPOB's witnesses contradict each other at election tribunal. Stories above. Lagos Blue Line rate to operate from August. You can read more on page 6. Exchange rate determines airfare, says ITA. Naira weakens to 765 naira to a dollar, and no 114% salary raise. Let's take a look at the Guardian newspaper. The Guardian is leading with the big story, flood of fury, no respite for Bayelsa, Kogi, Rivers, 30 others ahead of another cloud burst. Again, NNPC fails to remit as a federation shares of 786 billion naira for May. It is no longer business as usual in Nigeria. Tinubu rallies the investors. A missing Titanic sub suffered a catastrophic implosion. Passengers dead. You can read more on page 2. Forensic experts claim INEC deleted results on BVAS machine. 20% doctors, 33% nurses diagnosed inaccurately. Federal government hint. NLC cautioned government against increasing the electricity tariff. All right, so moving on, let's take a look at the Punch newspaper. The Punch is leading with DMO worries over low revenue as Nigeria's debt nears 81 trillion naira. The writer says the federal government's 10 trillion naira revenue can't support fresh borrowing. That's coming from DMO. A government to issue promissory notes as judgment debt nears 3 trillion naira. We can see a photo story showing the Paris summit. Subsidy removal, FX policy needed for survival, says Tinubu. Ogun tops as NPC registers of 49,000 deaths in 6 months. Scholars should not be relegated for money bags. LASU best students. You can read more on page 7. Oshomole, Adeleke, others bid farewell as the Percy is buried. Stories above. Federal government, states, local government share 786 billion naira May revenue. Labour discourse on collision costs over electricity tariff hike. And lastly, on the front page of the Punch newspaper, we have terrorists planning attack on religious fund centers. That's coming from DSS. And that's all we can take on the front pages of the papers. Join us after the break. We'll be right back. All right, welcome back. And if you're just joining me still today in the News on Vanguard Live, I am Precious Chikudi. Joining me to talk about some of the stories On the front pages of the papers this morning is Mr. Ayo Adio, Managing Editor, Avalon Daily. It's good to have you join me this morning, sir.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
All right, let's delve in. And I mean, NLC and civil society organizations have come out to say that they rejected the planned 40% in electricity hike, and also they've called on the government to shelve the increase. Looking at the removal of fuel subsidy, how timely is this decision?
Now, the reality is that the federal government seems to be caught between a rock and a hard place. The reality is that the country is struggling to raise enough resources and revenue to invest in critical, social infrastructure, and of course, real infrastructure across the country. It's even gotten worse over the last 8 years with a kind of unbelievably saddening fiscal and monetary policy that Nigerian people have suffered in the last 8 years. And so it's left this government with very little wiggle room. So on the one hand, it's had absolutely no choice but to take away petrol subsidy, which is costing the country trillions of naira every year. Even though I would have argued that the way the subsidy should have been removed should have been in phases rather than a one-off removal. But the truth is it had no choice but to remove the petrol subsidy. The same thing with electricity tariff. The reality is that the DISCOs, and in fact the entire electricity sector in Nigeria, have been craving for market reality policies where they can charge market reflective rates, and so that they can provide consumers with the quality of electricity that they want, the steady power supply. But unfortunately, now we're living at a time where there's record inflation, food inflation, and all of these 133 million people living in multidimensional poverty, highest unemployment rate in the entire world. It means that something has to give. And you're spot on to say that, is it timely for us to have a 40% increase in electricity? The truth is, I'm not sure that the Nigerian people can deal with all of this shock in one go. Petrol as at today selling as high as 700 naira per liter in some parts of the country as we speak. Now you add that to a 40% increase in electricity supply, that will inadvertently cripple a lot of businesses across the country. And you do not want businesses shutting out lights, because it will lead to higher unemployment, higher poverty, and will suffer to find the kind of growth that the economy is yearning for. So for me, what I want to see is a situation where, on the one hand, we can have a balanced and a pragmatic approach to dealing with the revenue crisis that the federal government has, and to not put the country into some sort of shock therapy where the economy cannot take all of these shocks that is being inflicted on it in one fell swoop. So I do not think that Nigerian people can deal with high petrol prices, high food prices, high electricity prices, all at a singular go. But it's left to see how the federal government is going to manage this impasse. But for me, something has to give. I do not think that the Nigerian people can deal with all these things in one full swoop.
All right. In your own view, how do you think that the federal government can actually tackle the energy crisis and find a lasting solution?
Sorry, the what crisis? I didn't hear that.
I said, in your own view, how do you think the federal government can, tackle the energy crisis that we're going through right now and find lasting solutions?
So you see, like I said, there's very little wiggle room for the federal government in reality, right? Bad economic policies has led us to this point today where it's become inevitable that we had to yank off a situation where we're spending trillions of naira every year on petrol subsidy. That's almost a given. There is almost national intellectual consensus that had to go. The problem is the manner in which it has to go. For me, I would have argued that it could have been done in phases. Say 25% goes up in the first 6 to 8 months to 1 year, another 25% goes, and then another 25% before it's fully removed. That would have been my approach. Also, I would have also simultaneously unbundled some sort of a transportation policy that invests heavily in mass transportation systems that prioritizes the movement of workers to and fro work and the movement of food and essential commodities across the country. That way, we're able to deal with inflation that is running away from us at an alarming rate. I'm sure that if we can keep the prices of food and transportation considerably low, we may be able to pull down inflation from about 22% to somewhere about 14 or 13%. And that might be a lot better for the economy. So for me, dealing with this at this point, the federal government has decided to remove everything in one full swoop. So for me, it has to now concentrate on transportation systems that keeps the prices of food and transportation down. Remember that the average Nigerian spends more on food and transportation than every other item, in their expenditure, in their household expenditure. And so if I can keep these two prices considerably low, then I'm sure that it gives the economy some breathing room, and it gives the federal government a huge opportunity to achieve the 8% growth that it seeks, to pursue over the course, of the 4-year administration. But if we don't do that, if we don't invest in these social systems that ensures that the price of food and transportation drops considerably, and you now have to add the cost of electricity prices to this, then I think that we might be pushing the economy over the cliff. Because what will then happen is that small and medium businesses will struggle to cope, will struggle to keep staff. That makes to lead to higher unemployment and higher poverty rates. And that's not the kind of thing that we want to see in our country. So I'd like to see a balanced approach and a pragmatic approach to dealing with this crisis that we find ourselves in.
All right. So one of the recommendations that have been made is that the government should look at the reduction of cost of governance. That way, the people can feel that the government basically can relate to the plight that the average Nigerian is going through. What are your thoughts?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, the Nigerian people cannot be living in poverty and penury while the politicians live in opulence. It's absurd. So the political class have to commit class suicide, I must argue. And the reality is that, listen, so many organizations today have redesigned their work schedule. People have to go to work now 3 times in a week instead of 5 days because they realize that their workers cannot buy petrol for 5 days in a week because that will inadvertently take all over, their household expenditure, right? And so if the average Nigerian is struggling to fuel his car to do legitimate work, we cannot afford the political class to be flying business class and first class on frivolous trips that adds nothing to the Nigerian economy. And so the Nigerian people at this very point must be extremely vigilant. Politicians cannot be foiling convoys of 12, 13 SUVs on taxpayers' funds. It's absolutely absurd. So all of these things have to be cut down, for us to have, some sort of shared pain here. And so because this entire burden is being placed on the masses because of the mismanagement of our economy from this political class. And the masses cannot continue to carry the burden of the incompetence of the politicians that they elect. And so if we must have to cut down on our daily expenses, if we must have to cut down on the things that we do every day, our politicians have no choice but to cut down on the excesses and the largesse that they have been living on over this past few years, because they have led us to this very point. If you recall, in 2011 and in 2012, when petrol subsidy was about being removed, Christopher Colade Shope had 500 billion and in excess to put back directly into the economy. How is it that 10 years after that, we are now having, if you take subsidy today, there is zero savings. We still have to borrow over 3 trillion to fund our budget deficit. That's the kind of economic mismanagement that should not be tolerated. And so if they have brought us to this point, the least they can do is to cut down on the kind of affluent lifestyles, the kind of opulence that they have lived in over the years, and show some respect to the Nigerian people who they are putting through this unbelievable pain and agony, because it's all our country and we want the best for our country, and if we must sacrifice, the political class too has to sacrifice.
All right. Of course, the organized labor and federal government have been having talks as regards a palliative to cushion the effect of a fuel subsidy. And in the last meeting, which looks like it wasn't so much for Nigerians, they were giving like about 8 weeks to, talk things through and then implement resolution. What do you think about the organized labor? Have they been able to show themselves so strongly for the Nigerian people?
I think that the Nigerian people have not been fair to the Labour Congress over the years. I think that the Nigerian people have not provided enough support, for the labor unions. I think that we have treated them dismissively, when in actual sense, whether we like it or not, they seem to be the only institution that are fighting for the survival of the middle and low class Nigerians. And the continuous onslaught against the labor unions seems to be the Nigerian people fighting against their own collective interest, whatever their shortcomings may be, and they have so many shortcomings. The truth is that the labor unions have put together very, very sensible proposals. They have not in any way totally resisted the removal of these subsidies. Their argument essentially is that three things need to happen. Workers need to have better remuneration, better wages for them to deal with inflation that this fallout will lead to. Better standard of living, which means better purchasing power, which means that the government should invest in critical infrastructure in terms of road, transportations, and all of that. That makes the naira in the pockets of many Nigerian workers, a lot more reasonable, at the end of the day. And I would argue that these are sensible propositions that are being put forward. And I think that it's important that the federal government meets them in the middle. Because at the end of the day, we don't want to push workers to the point where they completely drop tools. Because at 30,000 naira minimum wage, it's almost suicidal to tell people to continue to work for 30,000 naira in our country. Because even people who earn 200,000 naira and above are even struggling to survive today. So I don't know how you expect somebody to live on 30,000 naira with a family, in Nigeria today. And so I welcome the negotiations of the labor unions. I hope that they deal with the federal government, understanding our economic realities today. And I also hope that the federal government also realizes, the pain of the Nigerian people, and should find some sort of a middle ground, that helps us walk a fine balance, away from this quagmire that we found ourselves in as a country.
All right, moving on. Now, a section of legal practitioners have warned that Nigerians may have lost confidence in the judiciary following recent controversial decisions by judges and lawyers whose pursuit for money have eroded their quest for justice. How do you react to that? And, bearing in mind, not too long ago, a Senator Bukachua had come out to say that his wife was, rendering favors for some of his friends. What do you think about that?
I mean, that was shocking to see from the senator who made those very sad comments, even though that the wife has come days after to debunk many of those comments, to say that she never dished out any favors to her husband's friends, or any politician. But you and I know the state of our judiciary today. We know how certain elements of the judiciary have been compromised, by the political class. In fact, there is a deliberate strategy now by politicians to have their wives or their children being embedded in the justice system, so that they can be used when the need arises. And that's quite an unfortunate situation that we found ourselves. But the truth is We cannot isolate judiciary from what is the corrupt Nigerian system in itself. The Nigerian system is entirely a corrupt system. Many have even gone to the extent of describing it as some sort of a criminal institution. And that's because corruption is so pervasive in every sector of the Nigerian economy, such that it becomes unfair to isolate the judiciary when this corruption is so endemic and is found in every facet of our society. So you cannot deal with corruption judiciary in isolation if you've not dealt with corruption holistically, as a country. So what we need to do, rather than continuously cry about the corrupt judiciary or tomorrow cry about the corrupt police system, we have to tackle corruption as a country. And that will require, a very disciplined, collective approach, to say that this way of life is destroying our institutions, is destroying the fabric of our society, and of course, is worsening our living outcomes in Nigeria. We must tackle corrupt practices in our country. Now, we are not the first country to deal with corruptions or systemic corruptions. The South Koreans, the Singaporeans have dealt with these corrupt systems in their country, and they've been able to make tremendous progress. That means there's also a possibility, and there's evidence out there that we can make progress in dealing with corruption. The problem is that we've not had the political will and the cultural reorientation to be able to deal with this hydra-headed monster. And the earlier we address this problem institutionally and holistically as a people and as a cultural thing, we're not likely to make significant progress. So we can shout about the judiciary today or tomorrow about the police, but it's an endemic situation and it's engulfed our entire society, such that we cannot deal with this thing in isolation. And so I share the sentiments of many of the lawyers who've spoken about it, but we cannot deal with it as an isolation. It has to be dealt with holistically as a country.
All right, what kind of reforms are you also looking at that would come out from the judiciary?
Listen, you'd have to speak with a lot of legal experts to talk about the kind of deep-seated reforms that people would like to see that can move us forward. But over the top of my head, I would like to see a situation where judges are properly remunerated, where our courtrooms, are not only conducive for the judges to preside over, because if you've been to court before, you know that there are a lot of sittings that are cancelled because the courtroom is hot and the judges cannot sit because there's no power supply, right? And of course, at the heart of it, I want to see a justice system, that delivers or dispenses justice swiftly. The idea that people, some of whom are innocent, are waiting trial for years and years and years, is unacceptable to me. I want to see a justice system that is speedy in terms of dispensation and delivery of justice to the Nigerian people. And that is to my extent of my knowledge of the law. I am sure that legal professionals who have also looked at this system will prefer a wide range of solutions that are likely to move our justice system forward.
All right, moving on. Yesterday, a digital forensic expert narrated before the Presidential Election Petition Court how he uncovered that INEC wiped off a result of the presidential election. And before now, during the tribunal, some of the things that we've heard from the tribunal is that some of the petitioners have come out to say that they've not been able to have direct access to electoral documents, as well as Amazon Web Incorporated saying that there was no form of technical glitch whatsoever. There have been series of allegations on INEC since the tribunal started. What does this speak to, basically?
To be honest, I think that the back and forth in the election petitions and the behavior of INEC, I would look forward to many of the rulings on this matter. Because I've gone on social media, I think it was yesterday, and INEC had deleted a lot of their tweets before the presidential elections, which I found very, very embarrassing. But also, even before the elections, I think INEC had made the point that they wanted to, I can't remember the exact word that they used, but essentially they wanted to do something to the BVAS before they could reconfigure it for the governorship elections. I think they had approached the courts to get a decision on that, which was part of the reasons why the governorship elections were moved by a week. So I do not think that it's such a breaking story that the BVAS were tampered with. I think was also a subject of litigation even before the governorship elections, because INEC had approached the court that it wanted to do that. Having said that, I would wait to see the rulings of the court, because I'm sure it will also speak to some of the issues raised against INEC and the processes of INEC, and then we can make an informed public opinion of it. At the moment, I'd just like to observe what is transpiring in court, and just to hope that due diligence is done at the end of the day. So I'd like to wait for pronouncements of the esteemed judges of the court before I make an informed opinion as to some of the things that we're reading on social media as emanating from the election and petition tribunal.
All right, on a lighter note, let's take a look at Mr. and Mrs. And Mrs. is speaking this morning. She says, I heard Junior calling one of his female friend my queen. When I asked him about it, he said he heard it from you. You've never addressed me like that. So who is the person? And Mr. responds and says, that's what I call you behind your back.
Mr. Dada with another banger.
All right, thank you so much, Mr. Ayo Adio, Managing Editor, Avalon Daily. Thank you for sharing your contributions with us this morning.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Also, remember that you can equally like, share, and subscribe on all our social media platforms showing on your screen. To find out up-to-date stories, go to our website at www.vanguardindia.com to find out more. I am Precious Chukudi, and thank you for watching.